Welcome to this week's episode of Art Talk Tuesdays. If you remember last week, we completed the final piece in the addiction triptych and finished that all out. This week, I wanted to do something completely different, so we're switching to black and white. So the next at least 2 episodes will be featuring pieces that I've done strictly in black and white. Also, as you'll see here, I have a little table here. I wanted to show you some little details about scratchboard. I know I talked about one scratchboard piece that was in color a couple of weeks ago, and wanted to give you a few more details about scratchboard this time before we go into the details around this piece. So scratchboard is a subtractive drawing medium. That means that you are pulling color away. You're pulling the color out. As in with drawing, you're adding color on. To make something darker when you're drawing, you take the pencil and you add more graphite to the paper. With scratchboard, you're subtracting, which means that to make something lighter, I'm pulling it out. So usually you start with a board. This one was pre-black, but you can buy them white. Then I would paint the board over with ink, allow it to dry, and then I would take various scratching tools and scratch the image back out. So scratch the white out of the black. So here are some of the tools I use. I use some fine sanding paper to get certain textures and feels. Also some steel wool will give you a nice soft texture here. These are supposed to be pottery tools, but actually you can use them to scratch some of them. You can see this makes a nice texture. You can use some different things to do textures here. I use X-Acto knives, also sometimes a compass, something like that. Also surgical steel blades, very important. Sometimes I put these in the X-Acto. You can get these off the Amazon, surgical steel blades, and put those in. Make some nice scratches, different shapes of X-Acto heads. Then also one of the main things that I use is these glasses. These glasses, not only are they protective because when you're scratching, a lot of little shavings come up. You don't necessarily want to inhale them or get them in your eyes. It could happen. So wear the protective glasses. They also have a magnifier in them. And most importantly, they have lights. So when I'm really doing some real detailed work in here on the scratchboard, I can really get in and see because the area is lighted and it's magnified. So I can really see to get the detailed work that you'll see in a lot of these. You can't see it from here on the video, but if you look at what's going to happen after the video, I'll do a detail of the piece and you can go in and look at it. Also, you can check it out on my website, damonpowell.com, if you want to see some of the details, because on my website there's a little magnifier and you can zoom in on different portions of the image. If you didn't know that, now you know, please check it out. So having said that, let's jump right in. The name of this piece is entitled The Awakening. Obviously it's done in scratchboard. The size is 16 by 20. And this piece was actually inspired by a photo that I saw of my partner. She was my partner at the time. Of her sitting out on the beach and the wind was blowing and it was kind of lifting her hair. I did a lot more with it, but that idea, this whole idea of the wind, of the power, you look at the Bible talks about the wind of was blowing over the face of the waters in Genesis. The whole idea of this Hebrew term ruach being wind, or in the Greek the pneuma. So the wind being associated with the spirit that gives life, because without breath we have no life. You can go a couple of days without water. You can go quite a long time without food, but you can only go a few minutes without air, without breath, without wind. So that whole idea of this being awakened as air will invigorate you, invigorates the body, keeps it moving. So this whole idea of awakening, what that meant from a spiritual perspective. There are many types of awakenings. We have different series of awakenings throughout our life, because as I said previously, when we talk about the notion of enlightenment, it's not a destination to be reached somewhere when you arrive or you cross a certain threshold and now you've achieved enlightenment. It is an unfolding of degree, or actually we could say an enfolding of degrees. Just like the universe is in a constant state of expansion and renewal, we too are in a constant state of expansion and renewal. And so as we do that sustainably, because that's the problem with what's going on the planet right now, all the other organisms learn how to reach a state of in equilibrium with their environment, but humans, we fail to do that, and we don't do that, and then we use up the resources. So having said that, I'm going to get back on target. So we have these series of awakenings. So what really happens is there's an expansion, then you kind of plateau for a little while, then there's another series of awakening expansion, and so we become progressively more enlightened and we become progressively more awakened. New realities begin to present themselves because well, you may not know, but history is not a straight line. We think of it that way, it's taught that way, but if we actually look at the spiritual world, history is a spiral. And our spiritual lives are often a spiral. We come back to certain things and say you repeat the lesson until you get it. You really do. We come back to certain things, and if we become more awakened and more enlightened, then we also see those same circumstances in very different ways. The way you saw the world at 4 is not the way you see the world at 40, and it should not be. And it never will be. We cannot go back. So this illusion that we have of going back to a better time, going back to a better day, going back, it doesn't happen. It's not going to happen. You only have now and what you make of that, because we can never go back. And really half the time when you do go back, it's never what you thought it was, because the older you is now in the old place, and that still doesn't work. Once again, we're talking about expansion. We're talking about an enfolding and unfolding. So having said that, this whole idea of awakening, this piece, these symbols here on the outside, they actually have 9 rungs on each of them. And actually what drew me to these symbols was I was researching something, and there was an article about a guy who makes these. Some guy somewhere here in the US, he makes these symbols, he makes them out of copper, and he said that he downloaded this idea. We got a spiritual download for these symbols. He kept sending me his dream, and he started fashioning out of copper. And what he does is he hangs them at different places, and now he's selling them to people, and they have done all kinds of things for changing the energy in people's homes. People have slept with them in their rooms, said that they've been healed from certain illnesses, just feeling more energetic. So basically, these 9 rungs, these copper things. So I thought the whole idea of enlightenment, awakening, also we're awakening to our own power, the power of the universe to heal, to transform, and to do these things. So I put these in, and also, this is not in the symbol. The symbol is just a circle with these 9 rungs. This symbol here is the symbol for the Enneagram. If any of you are familiar with the Enneagram, it's a personality, psycho-spiritual personality profile. I really suggest that you check into it. If you don't get up on the Enneagram, you really should. So the Enneagram also has 9 personality or character types. And so the 9 rungs on here correspond to the 9 points on this circle here, which is what the Enneagram is. So I kind of integrated these 2 different symbols together because I felt like they complemented one another. Because when we look at talking about the Enneagram, wherever you are in a certain personality trait in the wheel, you want to, the movement toward integration or toward further awakening is toward an opposite point on the wheel. For instance, I am a 7 in the Enneagram with an 8 wing, and so my movement often is toward the opposite end of the spectrum. That is my way toward path toward awakening, toward integration, to integrate those other aspects of my being that are so far from where I am. And so this becoming a more full and complete and whole human being. So you should really check into that. That's another whole discussion. This right here, these symbols right here are part of the Fibonacci sequence. If you're familiar with the Fibonacci sequence, it's basically a series of numbers that shows a repeating pattern in nature. You can find it throughout nature. People talk about fractals, that type of thing. It's the same idea. So this is a repeat of the Fibonacci sequence here with this circle, and these, you see these, maybe you can't see it there, but these patterns radiating out. They're radiating in a certain way. So I went in and done that. Now, if we look at the symbols here, these are little kind of symbols for the heart. They mirror the symbol that is here inside the figure's heart. So we had that repeated, that pattern repeated again. I'm doing a lot of repeating symbols, repeating patterns. So the heart opening up on fire here, the fire of the heart, the fire within. You could say the life force, you could say the fire of life, whatever you want to say, the fire of awakening, because many times when you experience an enlightenment situation, you experience a sudden epiphany, a sudden rush, you do feel a rush of energy, a rush of power. Particularly we look at the more Pentecostal traditions, you talk about people falling out, speaking in tongues, officially known as glossolalia, that happens not just in the Christian tradition. Almost every religious expression has some form of that or has some experience of that, whether it's indigenous culture, form of religion, whatever. When we deal with the more what do you want to say, pneumatic aspects of that, the more spiritual aspects of that, when we get away from the dogma, the religion, there's always some type of experience or some room for those type of experience, these more ecstatic experiences. So this opening of the heart, Okay, that is where the awakening really occurs. It's all an inside job. As they say, as above, so below. I would say, as within, so without. And so this opening, expansion of the heart, this infusion of power, of spiritual power, if you will, into the heart is happening here. And so this energy is radiating out. So the flame is burning. You see the turning here is beginning to turn. Spinning, we talk about the chakras. That would be the heart chakra, which we know are spinning vortices of energy going forth. So this energy is bursting forth. You see here also, I repeated the Enneagram in here. We got the pointed star. So I'm just playing around with these different ideas. You see the figure's head is upturned. She's looking up where? Towards the heavens, looking up towards the sky, towards the openness, towards the expansion. This is a look of expansion. See the expansion. You see the hair is shooting up, right? Hair is shooting up because why? Because there's energy pouring through. There's power pouring through. The very power that we like to use, that we talk about energy and atomic energy, other things, is also the very power that powers the universe. But it also has a spiritual aspect, a spiritual origin, which we often refuse to acknowledge. And so the hand here is symbolic. You'll see this in another series of pieces I have. The hand is the hand of the divine, the hand of spirit, the hand of God, if you will, whatever you want to say, supporting the figure. Okay, sitting there supporting her. She was perched on it. Also provided you would have to show the fingers, giving her a backrest here. And she was sitting on here, but in meditation. You see she's in the lotus pose, full lotus pose. Meditation pose, classic meditation pose here. And then as she receives the power, it lifts her up. As I often talk about, particularly in my book, when we pray, the whole idea of spiritual power and being lifted up is what we call anagogy or anagogical, which means that the power lifts us up. It's uplifting. And so when we receive these experiences, we are lifted in some way, not only energetically, but spiritually. And so this lifting up and just symbolizing the power here, you see the lightning flowing down from the figure. I want it to be purposely ambiguous. Is it flowing up, energizing her, thus lifting the hair and energizing the heart, or is it this energy now flowing down and pushing away and pushing her up from the hand? Wanted to leave it ambiguous for you to kind of figure out. You see she's got on some long flowing robes here. This is a lot of detailed work in here. It took a lot of time. The scratchboard technique is very labor intensive, and it's a lot of deep in oogling, really doing a lot of fine lines, because everything you see is a scratch. Everything had to be scratched. All these are little tiny lines. So this technique takes me a lot of time. I probably spent about, probably about 22 hours just actually scratching on this piece. We're not talking about laying it out. We're not talking about sketching for the concept. We're not talking about the other research of the symbols and other things that I do, just the actual work time. And that's really not that long for this piece, special piece this size. You see a lot of artists that work in scratchboard, they work much smaller. Why? Because they can get done a lot more quickly. But I've got pieces even bigger than this, which I'll talk about one next week. But anyway, getting back to where I'm going. So we see the figure being lifted up here in the sense of spiritual power. As the heart opens up, the head tilts up, eyes are open because she's looking up. This power shooting through, lifting the hair, almost as you see this electricity falling through, filling her up with this spiritual energy, with this life energy, awakening the cells in her body, awakening her spirit, awakening her mind, unlocking her conscious and subconscious, allowing them to integrate more fully. This is what awakening is about. A lot of times people have these type of epiphanal awakening experiences, but if they're not involved with any type of religious tradition, they often have no context in which to understand them. That is one thing that I can say about organized religion. Despite the problems that there may be with it, it does provide a container. It does provide a context in which we can examine our spiritual experiences and have something reflect them off of, because most of us who don't have any type of attachment to a tradition or familiarity with a tradition, we don't have that container, and it often leads to more problems than it does solve them, unfortunately, because we can go off onto a lot of other things and draw a lot of other conclusions because we don't have any framework which to interrogate from which to interrogate that experience. So just putting that out there. So it's always good to have something that you're kind of at least reading, keeping an eye on, that kind of helps you frame the things that are happening to you, because the whole idea about being mystical or the mystic is that the mysticism is based in experience. Okay, it's an experiential form of spirituality as opposed to religion, which is often based in dogma, which is also about law and rules. And we do need some of those, but there has to be a balance, I think. And sometimes we get too much of one and too much of the other, because too much mysticism, you're all out here in the space, and what to say, you're too heavenly bound to be any earthly good. But we also get so bound into the rule and the letter of the law that we forget about the spirit of the law. Because just something, you can do something because it's legal or lawful, does not mean it's right, does not mean it should be done, does not mean it's just, a lot of other things. So we want to try to achieve a state of balance with all this. Gotten off on a tangent, so I'm going to leave that there. This piece is valued at $1,800. You can get it off my website. It's already mounted here, ready to go. If you want me to put it in frame, I'd be happy to do that for you. There are also prints available on my website, damonpowell.com. The prints start at $31 and go up depending on what other bells and whistles you want for that. And that's it. I will see you next week.